Newark, New Jersey. A chilly autumn night. October 2024. The first cold wind of the season swept across the overgrown grass outside Newark Municipal Stadium, carrying scraps of old football programs with frayed edges, faintly stamped 1994. On the rusted iron fence, a thin red ribbon had been tied loosely, swaying with each gust. Inside, the stadium was empty and dark, save for the flickering hum of a single overhead light and the distant glow of police cruisers idling outside the gates. Detective Vanessa Morales stood alone on the 50-yard line. Her heavy coat collar was turned up against the biting chill, her eyes fixed on the east bleachers, where a faint light seeped out from a narrow gap beneath row C. Nearly 30 years had passed since that night, yet the chill in her bones never really left. She stooped to pick up a yellowed scrap of paper that the wind had pushed to her feet. It was a program from that long-ago homecoming game, 1994, with 8 names shakily circled in red ink. Along the edge, a faint streak of dried blood remained. Morales clenched the paper in her fist, took a slow breath, and began walking toward the faint glow of the hidden staircase just discovered beneath the stands. Behind the fence, people had begun to gather. Silent, like shadows, watching, saying nothing. As her foot landed on the first step down into the darkness, a faint sound drifted up from the depths below. Session 14. Morales froze, glancing up at the empty bleachers above. There it was again, that unmistakable sensation crawling across her skin. They were never really gone. Newark, New Jersey, October 14th, 1994. That homecoming night was unusually cold. The sky hung heavy, clouds thick as concrete, and the wind cut through the rotting wooden bleachers of Newark Municipal Stadium, carrying with it the scent of damp grass and burnt oil from the food trucks at the gates. The stands were packed to the last inch, thousands of people. The drumline thundered, cheers and whistles rose in waves, music blared under the blinding white stadium lights flooding the turf below. In row C of the east bleachers, 8 children sat shoulder to shoulder. They wore matching red and white East Side high windbreakers. One clutched a bag of popcorn, another held a cold soda. Others elbowed each other to hush as the announcer called out the starting lineup. Their young faces glowed with excitement. Emily Rivera, just 9, the youngest, swung her legs in white sneakers, her hair tied in neat braids with red ribbons. Beside her, Noah Hernandez, a little older, the one who always laughed the loudest. And 6 more, each from a different class, from different families. But tonight, all in the same row, all here for the same game. At 8:21 p.m., the game was in the second half. Eastside was ahead by 3. The players collided like heavy machines, the impact echoing across the field. The crowd collectively held its breath with each play. Then the lights flickered. At first, just a quick stutter. Then everything went black. The sound collapsed, strangled in the dark. For a moment, nothing but the collective murmur of thousands. The announcer's voice cut out mid-sentence. The PA system screeched, then silence. The stadium sank into total darkness. Wind hissed through the bleachers. Someone laughed nervously. Others muttered, "Blackout again." It won't last long. 72 seconds. Only 72 seconds. When the lights came back on, the drums resumed their pounding, the cheers started up again as if nothing had happened. The game went on. But something hadn't come back. In row C, seats 11 through 18 were empty. A bag of popcorn lay spilled across the floorboards. A pair of white sneakers had been kicked askew under a seat. A game program, folded into quarters, sat on the bench, its margins scribbled in shaky red ink, 8 names circled. And along the edge, a faint streak of blood, dry and dull. Not a single person in the thousands present had heard a scream. Not a soul saw them walk away. No one remembered them leaving the row. That night, Newark PD cordoned off the stadium, floodlights scanning the stands, dogs brought in to sniff the splintered wood. Television crews live on the scene. But there was nothing. Nothing but 8 empty seats and silence. The next morning, newspapers across New Jersey carried the same headline. The Bleacher 8. 8 Newark children vanish without a trace. And for 30 years after, no one ever sat in row C again. Newark, New Jersey. October 12th, 2024. It had been raining since morning. A thin, unending drizzle had turned the grass around Newark Municipal Stadium into a slick field of mud. The maintenance crew clanged about on ladders, struggling with the ancient floodlights, hammers, and socket wrenches echoing through the empty stands. Anthony Diaz, one of the city's repairmen, knelt low, his hands gripping a rusted beam as he pried at a loose aluminum panel with a crowbar. His work boots sank deep into the cold, wet sludge below. "Diaz!" someone called from the scaffolding above. "You find that junction box yet?" "Not yet," Anthony muttered through gritted teeth. He froze, peering closer at the darkness behind the panel. Something was off. There was a hollow gap, a space that didn't belong in the stadium's blueprints. He eased his flashlight into the opening, the beam cutting through a fine, ashy dust that swirled and clung to the air. Below, a narrow rectangular shaft, cement walls, cracked and water-streaked. And further down, a staircase, descending deep into the earth. Anthony stepped back, heart hammering. The air that rose from the gap was unnervingly cold. He swallowed, then shouted up toward the lights, "Morales! Morales needs to see this. Now get her down here. Now." Less than 20 minutes later, Detective Vanessa Morales arrived, her dark uniform hidden beneath a heavy rain jacket, her boots sinking into the mud as she crossed the barricade. Her face was set, sharper than usual, her breath fogged in the chill as she crouched before the exposed gap. The air rising from the opening seemed to claw at her skin. Morales turned and ordered curtly, "Lock this area down. No one touches anything else." By dusk, the east bleachers were fully cordoned with yellow tape. CSU technicians and forensic specialists threaded a probe camera down into the stairs, while Morales and Lieutenant Ramon Lee stood over a small screen to watch the feed. The concrete steps dropped about 20 feet. At the bottom stretched a narrow corridor, walls lined in tattered burlap. The light glared across crude drawings smeared on the walls. Stick figures, footballs, a grinning sun, all painted in a strange, dark reddish-brown. One technician murmured, almost to himself, "That's not paint." Morales narrowed her eyes. Her voice was flat. "We're going in. Full team, now." The room at the end of the corridor froze everyone in their tracks. It looked like a classroom, sort of. 6 child-sized desks arranged in a circle. A cracked chalkboard at one end bore 4 words, written over and over again in jagged block letters: obey, trust, belong, ascend. In the corner stood a cabinet full of children's notebooks. Morales flipped through page after page, childish handwriting, repeating the same lines endlessly. "I belong to the circle. Ascension means love. Pain purifies." On the center desk of the circle were 8 folded red and white windbreakers, each embroidered with a name: Emily, Noah, Jason, Maria. And beneath them, a Polaroid photograph, yellowed and warped. The 8 children sat shoulder to shoulder in this very room, their faces vacant, one of them clutching a caramel apple still wrapped in cellophane. Behind them loomed a tall, thin figure wearing a white, antlered mask. On the faded margin of the photo, barely legible, was a line scrawled in pencil. Session 12, The Crown. Morales straightened slowly, her gloved hands curling into fists. She'd been 12 years old the night the Bleacher 8 disappeared. That night, she'd almost gone to the game. Now, staring at the Polaroid, she only thought one thing: "We've abandoned them long enough." Newark, New Jersey. Late evening, October 12th, 2024. The rain still hadn't stopped. Tiny droplets clung to the windshield as Vanessa Morales' car crawled through the aging streets of East Newark. She switched the radio off. Only the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the heavy thoughts in her mind filled the silence. The Polaroid sat in a case on the passenger seat. Every time she stopped at a red light, she glanced at it. The stadium lights from outside cut across it, making the children's pale faces in the photo look even more ghost-like. She didn't drive back to the precinct. Instead, she turned off onto Ferry Street and pulled up outside a small white house with a rain-soaked porch. The name still painted on the mailbox was one the city's papers hadn't stopped printing for 3 decades. Lydia Rivera. The door opened after a long pause. Lydia Rivera, nearly 60 now, her hair gone silver early, her eyes sunken, her face worn like driftwood. She stared for a moment, then simply nodded and stepped aside, letting Morales in. The little living room was warm, but no less cold for all the framed photographs on the walls. Emily Rivera, smiling in her school uniform. At the ice rink, cuddling a small dog on the porch. Morales stopped before one frame, a picture of Emily wearing the same red jacket from that fateful night, her small hands clutching a caramel apple. Morales's jaw tightened. Lydia's voice broke the quiet, low and brittle. Did they find something? Under the stadium? Morales didn't answer directly. She opened her case, took out the Polaroid, and set it on the table. Lydia stared at it, and began to weep. She doubled over, hands covering her mouth, a sound that was equal parts sob and eerie laugh. Then silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened, but were strangely clear. "I knew him," she whispered. Morales leaned in, her voice low. "Who?" "The man. The one in the mask." Emily called him Mr. Mallory. He was a substitute teacher for about 2 weeks before the game. He seemed so gentle, quiet, kind, or at least we thought so. Always lowered his head in the halls, complimented the kids. But Emily, she was afraid of him. She never said it outright, but I saw it. I saw the way she trembled when he walked into the classroom. And that night, she wore that same jacket. Morales dropped her gaze. A knot tightened in her chest. Near midnight, Morales was back at the precinct, heading straight for the archives. She rifled through Lafayette Street School's fall 1994 personnel files. In a long list of teachers was one odd entry. Substitute temp, ID, MA13. No full name, no address, no personal ID, only a payroll slip issued through a local bank that had folded in 1998. She slammed the folder closed. The door cracked open behind her. Lieutenant Lee stepped in, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed one on the desk silently, then asked, "Find anything?" Morales' voice was colder than before. He never existed, or someone erased him. She pulled a fresh file from her case, uncapped a red pen, and in sharp, deliberate letters across the top page wrote, "Suspect, Mallory. Find him." That night, Morales didn't sleep. In the quiet of the precinct's back office, she sat alone under the desk lamp, the Polaroid resting in front of her. Emily Rivera's face stared back at her from the faded photo, and for just a moment, Morales allowed herself to believe they were never really gone. They were just kept somewhere below. Newark, New Jersey, October 13th, 2024. The morning was bleak, the sky a dull sheet of lead. Morales stood outside the rusted iron gates of Lafayette Street School. The place where Emily had once studied now looked worn and tired, its paint peeling, windows sagging, and a crooked sign creaking in the wind. Established 1924. She stepped into the guard's office, where an elderly man was fussing with a battered coffee pot. His face was hollow, his beard gray and uneven, his sunken eyes sharp despite his years. "Frank Ellerby?" Morales asked. He looked up, frowned slightly, then gave a faint nod. When she mentioned the name, Mr. Mallory, his whole body stiffened, his eyes darkened. "I've never forgotten that night," he said, his voice raspy. "That man, he wasn't like the others." Morales waited silently for him to go on. "He never signed in, never left his real name anywhere. But I remember. He wore this paper mask with antlers at the school's Halloween parade that year. Said he was a forest spirit. The kids called him the Watcher of the Circle." A chill worked its way up Morales's neck. Ellerby lowered his voice further. One night, I was cleaning the gym, and I heard chanting. I opened the door, and he was there, with 6, maybe 7 kids, sitting cross-legged in a circle, still wearing that damn mask, talking about ascension, about cleansing fear. I told the principal. They said it was group therapy, told me to stay out of it. When Morales pressed him, Ellerby just looked at her for a long time before adding one last line. 2 days later, the kids disappeared, and I quit. That afternoon, Morales returned to the stadium. The forensics team had uncovered another hidden chamber under the bleachers, a steel door, heavy and ice-cold. Inside, it was almost empty, save for a cracked wooden cabinet. She opened it carefully. Inside were several dusty VHS tapes, stacked neatly. Each one bore a shaky, handwritten label. Session 6, Session 7, Session 12. Morales slipped on a fresh pair of gloves and lifted one out, her eyes hard. Bag all of them. Get them digitized immediately. I want every frame. That night, in the precinct's tech lab, Morales sat with 2 technicians and Lieutenant Lee. The screen flickered and hissed as the first tape played. Grainy footage of a round, dimly lit room underground. 8 children sat in chairs, heads bowed, perfectly still. And then he appeared. The man with the antlered mask, tall, moving slowly around the circle. His voice, low and sing-song, filled the speakers. Children of the circle, you will unlearn fear. You will ascend. He placed his hand on each child's head. Say it. You belong to the circle. The children spoke in unison, weakly. I belong to the circle. The screen went black. The tape hissed. Morales's fingers clenched into fists. Lee glanced at her, his voice unsteady. That's brainwashing. Morales shook her head slightly, eyes still fixed on the black screen. No. That's preparation for something. On the table before her, the old Polaroid still sat under the harsh light. Next to it lay a new discovery from the hidden room, a different tape, shoved deep in a corner, its label written faintly in red chalk. Session 14. Morales stared at it, and for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready to know the truth. Newark, New Jersey. Dawn, October 14th, 2024. Morales hadn't slept. She sat alone in the records room, the cold desk lamp casting a harsh glow over a web of notes, the names of the Bleacher 8, circled in red, arrows and question marks scrawled between them. Beside her, the screen froze on one haunting frame from the tape. Emily Rivera's tiny hands gripping her chair, her head bowed as the man in the antlered mask placed his hand on her hair. Morales stopped, rewound, and watched that moment again. She heard the door creak. Lee appeared, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, his eyes as red as hers. He set down a thin new file and slid it toward her. "We match the name on one of the jackets," he said. Morales opened it, her eyes narrowing at the bold type, Noah Hernandez. He was alive. An hour later, Morales drove to the North Ward Psychiatric Hospital, where Noah Hernandez was being kept under observation. The 38-year-old man looked like a ghost. Skin pale, skeletal frame, hair matted, curled up in the corner of a sterile room under the harsh fluorescent lights. Morales pulled up a chair, set the Polaroid on the table between them. Noah looked at it, for a long time. Then a faint, hollow smile tugged at his lips. "You found it," he whispered. His voice barely carried. "We were 8 once, but then we were 7. Morales stayed steady. Her question came softly. "Emily?" Noah blinked, his expression twisting like he was fighting something inside. "She was the crown. They chose her. Always her." Morales frowned. "Why?" Noah met her eyes, his voice trembling now. "Because she could take it. The pain. For all of us. She wore it. The crown. The hooks. The blood. She never screamed. Not once." A chill crawled down Morales' spine. Noah lowered his voice to a whisper, glancing at the walls like someone might be listening. "Session 14 wasn't for us. It was for her." Morales took a slow breath, then signaled to the nurse outside. Noah was led back to his bed, but his hollow eyes never left hers as the door closed. Later that afternoon, Morales returned to the underground chamber beneath the bleachers. The forensic team had cleared more debris, exposing more of the walls. In a dark corner behind the cabinet, something caught her eye, a fresh mark carved into the concrete, a crown, still wet with blood. On the floor beneath it, a new Polaroid, damp from the cold air. Morales crouched, lifted it carefully. Emily. But not the little girl from 1994. A grown woman now, standing in the shadows, her black hair long and falling over half. Her face, her eyes vacant. On her head was the crown, a twisted copper and iron lattice, blood dried into the sharp hooks that dug into her temples. At the bottom of the photo, a jagged line of crimson ink. Session 14 begins. Morales stood there, gripping the photo, her pulse hammering in her ears. The radio crackled above her. Lee's voice came over the comms. "Vanessa, you need to hear this. We're picking up a strange broadcast citywide. People are calling it in." Morales pressed the headset to her ear. At first, just static. Then a girl's voice, soft but chilling, weaving through the noise. "We buried what they did to us. We obeyed. We trusted. We were broken. Now, you will remember with us." It was Emily. Morales slowly lowered the headset. She looked into the darkness of the chamber and whispered to herself, "She's back. Newark, New Jersey. Night of October 14th, 2024. As night fell over the city, Newark felt different. The streets were eerily quiet, windows dark, and old radios in garages and corner diners all at once began to crackle with the same strange sound. At first, just static, then a girl's warped whisper, slipping through time. "We remember. We return. The circle is not closed." The city's emergency dispatch was overwhelmed. Calls poured in, citizens reporting a strange signal, distorted recording, a child's voice on the air. On social media, videos of flickering street lamps and the chilling broadcast went viral, all bearing the same hashtag. #The Crown returns. At the precinct, Morales stood before a map covered in red pins, phone pressed to her ear, fingers trembling as she listened to the reports flood in. A technician rushed in, handing her a quick transcript of the radio signal, his face pale. It was just 4 words, repeated over and over. "Session 14 begins now." Morales gripped the paper, turned to Lee, and said flatly, "She's not just reminding them. She's summoning them." By 10 p.m., the municipal stadium had been hastily cordoned off, but people were already gathering. At first, just a few dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. They came in silence. No one called them. No one told them to come. Yet they came, worn, weathered faces, of those who had sat in row C all those years ago, the parents of the Bleacher 8, and even strangers who claimed not to know the story, but felt somehow pulled here. They filled the stands under the golden glare of the floodlights, as though enacting a ritual of their own. No one spoke, no one moved. Morales stood at midfield, her shoes sinking into the wet grass as she stared at the packed bleachers. She could feel Emily's presence, somewhere among them, like a cold breath crawling up her spine. And then the lights went out. In the darkness, the stadium held its breath, until the east bleachers flickered back to life, their lights trained on row C. From the far tunnel, 8 children emerged, dressed in pristine red and white. Windbreakers, their hair neatly combed, their faces blank. Not quite ghosts, not quite alive. They stopped at midfield, forming a perfect circle. And then the 9th figure appeared. Emily Rivera, now a grown woman, her black hair hanging loose around her hollow face, walked into the center of the circle, carrying the crown. The hooks glinted faintly, rusty with old blood. She didn't speak. Slowly, she raised the crown and placed it on her head. At once, the 8 children spoke in unison, their voices even, eerie, filling the air. "We remember. We return. We are the circle. We are the crown." Morales drew a deep breath and stepped closer, her voice cutting through the silence. "Emily, you don't have to do this. You don't have to finish it." Emily turned slowly. For just a moment, something flickered behind her empty eyes. Sorrow, perhaps regret. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I already did." Above them, the stadium speakers crackled, a recording breaking through the static. A child's voice, faint but clear. "We waited. Now you will remember too." On the stands, heads bowed. Some wept quietly. Others rose and began walking down to the field, one by one, joining the circle. No order, no force, just memory guiding them. Morales stayed at the edge, watching as Emily placed the crown, gave her a final glance, and disappeared with the 8 children into the dark tunnel beneath the bleachers. By the time Morales reached the tunnel entrance, they were gone. All that remained was the blood-stained crown lying in the grass, and a fresh message carved into the concrete wall. The circle closes. The crown rests. Newark, New Jersey. Morning of October 15th, 2024. At the precinct, Morales sat alone in the dim interrogation room, arms folded over a thick file. Outside in the hall, Lee approached, knocked softly, then entered, his expression heavy as he set down a freshly printed report. "The tech team cracked part of the cipher carved in the chamber," he said grimly. "Turns out they weren't just scratches." Morales flipped through the photos, walls covered in concentric circles, eyes crossed out, sequences of numbers, and a triangle pierced by a vertical line. In one corner, faint words, "The crown endures." "Their symbols match," Lee continued. "A cult called the Ascendants. FBI raided them in Vermont in '89. People thought they were gone. But..." Morales lowered the pages, her voice like steel. "They just moved here." Meanwhile, in a dusty roadside motel outside Newark, Emily Rivera stood before a cracked mirror, candlelight flickering across her gaunt face. On the table lay the blood-stained crown amid old papers, a Polaroid of the 8 children, a bundle of rusted keys, and a small folded scrap of paper. She opened it, scrawled in a child's shaky hand. "The crown doesn't feel pain anymore." Emily shivered faintly. She bowed her head, pressing her fingers into the sharp hooks of the crown until blood welled. In her palms, behind her, a tall man stood silently. Morales didn't know yet, but Jeremy Cross, the cousin who had watched over the twins at the game all those years ago, had been found. He trembled, his hands bound, eyes wide with dread. "I didn't sign up for this," Jeremy whispered. "I didn't know it would turn into this." Emily turned, her hollow stare locking on him. "You stood there. You watched them lead us down. You didn't scream. You didn't run. You chose to forget. But I didn't, and tonight, you'll remember." She reached down, lifting the crown, her voice like a serpent's hiss in the dark. "Session 15 doesn't start until you kneel." Jeremy collapsed to his knees, his whole body shaking. Later that afternoon, Morales got an urgent call from Harper Voss's mother. She'd found an old notebook hidden in a bedroom vent. Morales came to collect it immediately. On the final page, her heart tightened. Harper had drawn 8 children in a circle, one in the center wearing the crown, blood dripping down. Beneath the drawing, in a trembling scrawl, she said, "We were waiting, but now we're awake." Morales shut the notebook, stepped out onto the porch, and looked toward the stadium. A cold wind cut through her coat. She knew Emily hadn't disappeared. She was preparing, and when night came, she'd continue. Clutching the notebook tight, Morales whispered to herself, "None of us can forget anymore." Newark, New Jersey. Night of October 15th, 2024. The municipal stadium burned bright under a ghostly glow. People streamed in silently, as if called by some invisible hand. They passed through the barricades as though they weren't even there. Old faces and young ones, the weary and the wide-eyed, all gathered, their vacant gazes fixed on the east bleachers. Morales hurried across the damp grass, CSU lights sweeping the rows above. But tonight, There was nothing left to search for. Everyone was here. Every seat was full. A technician leaned close, speaking low. "We found a secondary tunnel. Connects the main chamber to the old boiler room. It's been sealed for decades." Morales said nothing. Her eyes caught the fresh smear of blood etched into the wall as she descended. Session 15, when the bleachers are full. And now, they were. Deep below, in the earth beneath the stadium, Emily stood waiting. The crown on her head gleamed faintly in candlelight, the metal hooks biting into her temples. Before her, the circle of 8 children stood in place, faces blank, windbreakers crisp. At her side, Jeremy Cross knelt on the floor, bound, mouth taped shut, eyes wide with terror. Emily stepped into the circle. Her voice cut the cold air like a blade. "Session 15 begins." The circle bowed their heads in unison. Morales and Lee burst into the chamber, flashlight beams cutting across the damp stone. Morales shouted, her voice cracking the silence. "Emily! Stop! You don't have to do this." Emily Tay didn't turn. She knelt at the center of the circle, her fingers tracing the blood along the crown. "We've waited long enough," she replied calmly. "Now, they will remember." Morales stepped closer, her eyes locked on Emily's hollow stare. "This isn't the way to end it. You can stop this. You can come back." Emily tilted her head slowly, a faint, eerie smile touching her lips. "I already came back." She placed her palm against the wall beside her and pressed hard. The entire chamber shuddered. The stone groaned. The lights above flickered and died. Then, a chant thundered through the darkness, pounding like a drumbeat. "We are the circle. We are the crown. We are the memory." Morales shielded her eyes as shadows swirled around them. When the lights returned, the room was empty. Only Morales, Lee, and Jeremy remained, Jeremy still on his knees, too terrified to speak. On the floor where Emily had knelt, the crown lay waiting, still glistening with fresh blood. Beside it, a new message carved into the stone. "The circle is awake." Morales crouched, picking up the crown, her hand trembling, her pulse hammering in her ears. She stood, staring into the black depths beyond, and whispered, "If you're still out there, I'll find you." Newark, New Jersey. November 1st, 2024. The municipal stadium was now nothing more than a fenced-off field of overgrown grass. A sign hung crookedly at the gate, permanently closed. Future Memorial Garden Site. Inside, cement trucks, cranes, and workers moved methodically, pouring cold gray slabs to seal the rotting bleachers and the dark tunnels below. The papers declared the investigation officially closed. No further evidence found. The strange radio signals had fallen silent. The whispers that once haunted the nights were gone. Morales stood on the grass, her heavy case file clutched tight, watching the workers below. Her gaze fixed on the spot where she had once seen blood on the wall, where the words, "The circle is awake," had been carved. She didn't believe it was over. In her pocket, she still carried the crown, cleaned of blood now, but the cold, sharp hooks still pressed into her palm like ice burns. In a quiet motel room outside the city, Emily Rivera sat before a mirror, her black hair falling loose, her hollow eyes reflecting candlelight. She no longer wore the crown. On the table before her lay a fresh sheet of paper, the old Polaroid of the 8 children, and a new, frantic sketch. Hundreds of concentric circles, a crowned figure at the center, arms outstretched. Below it, one phrase, "Session 16 awaits." She set the pen down, a faint smile crossing her lips as she murmured to herself, "We closed the circle, but we never really left." That night, Morales couldn't sleep. She returned to the empty stadium after the crews had gone, standing alone on the dark grass, listening to the wind whistle through the skeletal remains of the bleachers. And she heard it, faint, far away. Children's laughter, the scrape of a metal crown on concrete, and a cold whisper curling through the darkness. "We are still waiting." Morales closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, then looked squarely at the east bleachers. Far away, a street lamp flickered, like a quiet warning. She knew this wasn't over, and deep down, she made herself a silent promise. Next time, I'll be ready.